"Mama!" Olisa had called her in the distance many times with joy that leaped like a flame. But as he neared the corner now, he saw the apron folded in her bag, saw the gloves peeking out, saw the wear in her slippers. He looked uncertain. His friends were talking about a new place to buy shawarma, about a teacher's joke. One of them glanced at Udoka, then at him. "Who is that woman?" the friend asked casually. Olisa's breath caught. His answer came too quickly. "I do not know." In a beautiful city of Lagos, where the nights hummed softly with distant horns and the air smelled faintly of dust and sea, Udoka stirred awake before the first cock crowed. The room was small, barely wide enough for the wooden bed she shared with her son and a table with a flickering kerosene lamp. Outside, the world still slept, wrapped in darkness. She turned quietly so as not to wake Olisa, who lay curled beside her, breathing softly. His school uniform, carefully washed and hung by the window, swayed gently in the humid air. She smiled faintly, brushing a rough hand across his cheek before sitting up. Her body ached from the day before. The soles of her feet throbbed from walking long distances. Her palms cracked from scrubbing. Still, she reached for her worn slippers and tied her scarf over her hair. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered softly, her voice hoarse from sleep. "Give me strength for another day." The sound of the lamp's flame filled the quiet as she moved around the small room, collecting her bucket, gloves, and an old apron neatly folded on a chair. Her eyes rested again on Olisa, and a warmth spread through her tired heart. Everything she did, every sore muscle, every sleepless night was for him. Stepping outside, the Lagos air greeted her. Thick, damp, and restless even before sunrise. The sky above Yaba was still gray, a faint promise of dawn showing on the horizon. A few early traders were already setting up by the roadside, arranging fruits under dim lanterns. Udoka walked quickly, her slippers slapping against the pavement. The streets were quiet, except for the distant rumble of buses and the hiss of street sweepers clearing debris. She wrapped her shawl tighter as she made her way to the bus stop. By the time she reached the main road, the first yellow Danfo buses had started moving. She waved one down and climbed in, clutching her small purse tightly. The bus smelled of sweat and diesel, the conductor half asleep but already shouting for passengers. "CMS, Obalende, CMS!" Udoka sat silently in a corner, staring out the window. Her first job awaited, cleaning the office of a real estate company in Victoria Island. She thought of the manager there, a man who never looked at her directly, but always expected perfection. As the bus rattled through the half-awake city, Udoka closed her eyes for a moment. A wave of weariness rolled through her, but she forced it down. There was no time for rest. By 5:15 a.m., she arrived at the tall glass building. The guards at the gate nodded as she entered. They knew her well, the quiet cleaner who came before everyone else and left before anyone noticed. "Good morning, Mama Olisa," one of them greeted kindly. "Good morning, sir," she replied, smiling faintly. Inside, the building was silent, the marble floors cold under her worn shoes. Udoka filled her bucket and began her routine, mopping, dusting, wiping, and polishing. The smell of detergent filled the air. As she worked, her mind wandered to Olisa's school fees, the overdue rent, and the list of things he needed. A new pair of shoes, notebooks, pencils. Her arms moved mechanically, each stroke of the mop guided by years of practice. Yet inside, she prayed with every breath. "Please, God, let him never know this struggle. Let his hands never be as rough as mine." By 7:30 a.m., she was nearly done. The city outside was now fully awake. Horns blaring, vendors shouting, buses swerving. She gathered her things quickly, slipping out before the office staff arrived. They never saw her, only the clean desks and shiny floors she left behind. Her next stop was Surulere. She worked for a woman there, Mrs. Bello, who owned a large house and liked things spotless. Udoka took another danfo, balancing her cleaning supplies on her lap. When she arrived, Mrs. Bello's gate was already open. She walked in, greeting the woman who stood on the veranda in a silk robe, sipping her morning tea. "Good morning, Ma," Udoka said, bowing slightly. Mrs. Bello glanced at her over the rim of her cup. "You're late today, Udoka. I've told you. You must be here before 8. "I'm sorry, Ma. There was no early bus from Yaba," Udoka replied softly, setting her bucket down. Just make sure the kitchen is spotless today. We'll have visitors by noon." "Yes, Ma." The next few hours passed in silence. Udoka scrubbed, swept, and polished while Mrs. Bello moved from room to room, giving short, sharp instructions. The scent of disinfectant mixed with that of perfume and breakfast. Eggs frying in butter, toast crisping in the toaster. The smell made Udoka's stomach tighten, reminding her she hadn't eaten since the night before. At 11:45 a.m., Mrs. Bello dismissed her with a brief nod. "You can go. Don't forget to clean the guest room tomorrow." "Yes, Ma. Thank you, Ma." Outside, the sun blazed fiercely. The road shimmered with heat as she made her way to a small roadside stall. She bought a sachet of water and a piece of bread, her only meal before evening. Sitting under the shade of a mango tree, she ate slowly, watching people rush past. For a moment, she let her mind rest. She imagined Olisa in his classroom, head bent over a book, his brown eyes focused and bright. He loved to read, always asking questions she struggled to answer. "Mama," he often said, "one day I'll be a big man. You'll never have to work again." Those words kept her alive. When the church clock nearby struck noon, she stood, dusted her wrapper, and prepared for her final shift, the night job at the hospital. But before that, she had to return home for a while to check on Olisa. The journey back was long. The bus was crowded, the air thick with sweat and chatter. By the time she reached Yaba, her body was screaming for rest. She walked quickly down the narrow path to their compound, a cluster of small rooms surrounding a shared courtyard. Olisa was outside, sitting on a wooden stool, his school bag at his feet. He looked up as she approached, his face lighting up. "Mama," he called. Udoka's exhaustion melted instantly. "My son, how was school today?" "It was fine," he said proudly. "Teacher said I did well in mathematics." She smiled, kneeling slightly to meet his gaze. "I'm proud of you, Olisa. Always study hard, eh? That is the key to everything." "Yes, Mama," he said, grinning. She handed him a small loaf of bread she'd saved from earlier. "Eat this, my dear. Mama will cook rice later tonight when I come back." He nodded and began eating happily, unaware that his mother hadn't eaten enough herself. Inside, Udoka changed her clothes, washed her face, and sat for a moment beside the window. The breeze carried the smell of frying oil and burning firewood from other homes. She longed to lie down, even for 10 minutes, but she couldn't. It was almost time to go again. Olisa looked at her, his young face thoughtful. "Mama, do you have to work again tonight?" She smiled gently. "Yes, my son. Mama has to clean the hospital, but don't worry, I'll be fine." He frowned. "You work too much, Mama." She reached out and stroked his hair. "It's only for a while, my child. One day you'll finish school, get a good job, and take care of me. Then Mama will rest." He smiled shyly. "I will, Mama. I promise." She stood, adjusted her scarf, and leaned down to kiss his forehead. "Be good, Olisa. Lock the door after I go. I'll be back by morning." As she left, the sky was turning deep orange. The sounds of Lagos at dusk rose around her. Children laughing, radios playing high-life music, vendors calling out prices. She walked quickly, her shadow long against the dusty ground. By the time she reached the hospital, the street lights were flickering on. She changed into her uniform, tied a mask over her face, and began mopping the endless corridors. The scent of antiseptic filled her nostrils, sharp and cold. Nurses passed her by, sometimes smiling, sometimes not noticing her at all. Hours dragged by. Midnight came and went. Her feet ached, her eyes burned, but she kept moving. At one point, she leaned against her mop and looked out a window. The city lights twinkled like stars below. Somewhere out there, Olisa was sleeping peacefully. That thought gave her strength. When her shift finally ended at 4 a.m., she cleaned her tools, washed her hands, and stepped outside. The air was cool, almost tender. Dawn was beginning again, a pale glow spreading across the horizon. She stood for a moment, breathing deeply. Another day had ended, and another would soon begin. As she began the long walk back home, her mind whispered the same prayer she had said every day for years. Let him never know this struggle. Let my pain build his tomorrow. The streets were empty, except for a few early risers and distant buses rumbling awake. Udoka's figure moved through the dim light, small, tired, but unbroken. Her eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead. Behind her, the night melted into morning and Lagos began to stir again. For everyone else, it was the start of a new day. For Udoka, it was only the continuation of her endless sacrifice. A mother's quiet war fought before the dawn. In the small room where morning light pushed through the thin curtains, Udoka sat on the edge of the bed with a small tin box in her lap. The box was dented at the corners and smelled faintly of metal and old soap. She opened it slowly. Inside were folded notes, a few crisp new ones, and many tired ones. There were stacks of coins, sorted by value and wrapped in bits of paper. She touched each stack like a mother touching the forehead of a sleeping child, careful and full of care. School first, she whispered to herself, lifting out a folded paper that held a list she had written and rewritten many times. Rent next, food last. She smiled a little at the order. It had not changed in months. Perhaps it would never change until Olisa finished school. The house was quiet. Olisa had already left for school, his bag bouncing behind him, the sound of his laughter still warm in her bones. He had looked back at the door just before leaving and said, "I will read hard today, Mama." He always said that. Each time, it felt like a promise hung on the wall with his uniform. She counted. Each coin clicked softly on the wooden table. 1,000, 2, 2,000, 5, 3,000. She paused and slid aside a small portion into a different corner of the tin. For the unexpected, she told herself, even though she already knew any unexpected thing would grow large and hungry and eat more than the small corner could feed. Her stomach grumbled as she put her hand to it. It felt like an old engine decided to rattle for attention. She sipped water and ignored it. There was a half cup of rice left in the bag. Enough for dinner if she stretched it with sauce and vegetables. She would eat from the pot after giving Olisa his share on a proper plate. He always seemed to eat more when his food was served neatly, when he believed the world was orderly and kind. She folded the notes again and closed the tin. The lock clicked. Her eyes fell on a photo by the window, a small picture of Olisa taken at his last school event. His head was slightly tilted, his smile wide and uneven. She touched the picture with her finger as if it could feel the love she could not say aloud. At the bus stop, the heat of the day was already lifting from the road. The Danfo bus pulled up wheezing and she climbed on, holding her small bag close. At Surulere, she stopped to buy tomatoes. The vendor, a woman with bright eyes and bracelets that chimed when she moved, smiled at her. "Good morning, sister. How much do you want?" "2 small ones, please," Udoka said, picking carefully. "And 1 onion." The vendor weighed them with learned fingers. "The price has gone up today. There was rain. The roads were bad." Udoka nodded without surprise. Prices did not ask permission to rise. They rose because they were alive and people had to eat. She handed over a note and kept her face calm when the change felt too light. As she turned to leave, the vendor tilted her head. You always buy small, sister. You must cook well to make it stretch. Udoka smiled. A good pot listens to your heart, she said, and the vendor laughed. On the way to her afternoon cleaning job, she crossed a narrow lane where children played with a flat ball. One boy kicked it too hard and it skidded into a puddle. They shouted with the despair of children, which felt like thunder but passed like dust. Udoka looked at them and thought of Olisa's small feet, always running, always eager. She felt a pull to hurry and finish her work, to get back home and be there when he returned from school. She worked at a small dentist's office on the first floor of a busy building. The smell of antiseptic and mint hung in the air. She liked it more than the heavy smell at the hospital. This smell felt cleaner, like a promise. The dentist, an older woman with soft hands, greeted her with a nod. Good afternoon, Udoka. How is your son? He is well, ma. Thank you, Udoka replied. Good. Please make sure the waiting room is spotless today. We had many children in the morning. Udoka's tools were familiar. A mop, a bucket, cloths for wiping chairs and glass. She moved through the room with steady motions. On the wall, a poster showed a smiling family with perfect teeth. Brush twice a day, it said. She thought of the small toothbrush she had bought for Olisa last month, how he had held it as if it were a golden award. By late afternoon, the sun had softened. She finished and collected her pay in a brown envelope. The dentist pressed the envelope into her hand and said, You are very good, Udoka, thank you. Thank you, ma, Udoka answered. She placed the envelope deep in her bag, beside her tin small key, wrapped in a piece of cloth. She walked home with her mind already in the kitchen. The tomatoes and onion, the spice she had left in a small jar, the oil that had to be measured by drops, not spoons. At the compound gate, she heard a sudden burst of laughter. Children were racing in circles, a boy with no shoes dragging a stick along the ground to make a harsh, happy song. She stepped around them and moved toward her door. Olisa was inside, sitting at the table with his notebook open. He looked up when she entered, his eyes bright. Mama, you came early today. A little, she said. She placed the tomatoes and onion on the table like they were a gift from a feast. How was school? He smiled. We read a story about a boy who wanted to fly. The teacher asked who had seen a plane up close. I said I had seen one in the sky. It was very small, but very fast. Udoka laughed softly. One day, you will not only see it up close, you will sit in it, and you will look down and see these roofs like the backs of sleeping animals. His mouth opened in a small wonder. Really, Mama? Yes, she said, and her voice was firm because some promises needed a firm voice to carry them forward. Really. He stood up and held out an exercise book. Mama, I got 9 out of 10 in mathematics. I missed one because I forgot to carry a number. She took the book and studied the red ink. 9 out of 10 is very good, but you can do 10 next time. I will, he said, with a nod so serious it made her smile. She put on a pot and began to chop tomatoes. The knife was not very sharp, but she pressed carefully, cutting thin slices to coax more flavor from less. The onion stung her eyes, and she blinked. She told herself it was the onion. She told herself that every time. Olisa watched her with the full attention of a child who loves and trusts completely. Mama, when I finish school, he said, I will buy a big bag of rice and we will cook a lot and eat until we cannot move. She laughed. That is not wise, but it is a good picture. I will also buy you a new scarf, he added, looking at the one tied carefully around her head. It will have flowers on it. And what about a new pair of shoes? She asked, teasing. These ones can talk. He looked at her slippers, the edges worn, the fabric thin. His face changed, serious again. Yes, Mama, new shoes too. The oil hissed softly as she poured the tomato and onion into the pot. The room filled with a warm smell. She added salt, a pinch of ground pepper, and stirred with slow, patient circles. She added a little water to stretch the sauce, then poured in the washed rice, whispering a short prayer to the pot itself. "Cook well," she said to it. "Please." While the rice simmered, she washed Olisa's uniform in a bucket by the door, rubbing the collar with a bit of soap and her thumb. Her hands were strong and careful. The water turned gray. She wrung the shirt and hung it near the window, where the breeze could meet it. Olisa moved to her side. "Mama, can I help? You can sweep the floor after I finish cooking," she said. "Help is welcome, but you must not cut your fingers with the knife." "I will be careful," he said seriously, and returned to the table with his books. When dinner was ready, she served him first. She always served him first. She placed his portion on a plate and added an extra spoonful without letting him see she did it. Then she scooped a smaller portion for herself and pretended it was the same size. They sat together on the bed that also served as their dining bench. "This is very sweet, Mama," he said between bites. "The sauce tastes like happiness." She laughed, soft and a little shy. If food could hear, it would be happy to be praised like that. They ate quietly for a while. Outside, voices rose and fell. Someone coughed. A radio played an old song about love. The night had its own heartbeat, steady and familiar. "Mama?" Olisa asked suddenly. "Why do you sometimes eat very slow?" She paused, the spoon still in her hand. Then she smiled and touched his cheek. "Because I like to stay with you at the table longer." He seemed satisfied with that answer. He ate faster and finished his plate. She pushed a small part of hers onto his plate when he was not looking, and he ate it happily, humming a little tune. After dinner, she washed the plates and cleaned the pot, setting it upside down to dry. She watched him complete his homework, his head bent, his hand moving across the page with care. He sometimes chewed his lower lip when he was thinking. She knew every small habit he had, and each one felt like a star she had memorized in the night sky. There was a knock at the door. It was their neighbor, a woman who sold fabrics in the market. She stood in the doorway, smiling politely. "Good evening, Udoka. I am sorry to bother you." "You are not a bother," Udoka said. "Please come in." "No, I will not stay. I only wanted to remind you that the landlord came today. He said he will be collecting rent this weekend." Udoka's smile did not change, but her heart dipped slightly. "Thank you. I will be ready." The neighbor gave a little nod. Her eyes moved to Olisa, who was writing carefully and softened. "Your son studies well. He tries," Udoka said. "You are doing well," the neighbor replied, then stepped back into the corridor. When the door closed, Udoka stood still for a moment, listening to her own breath. The rent was due. She saw in her mind the little tin box, the neat piles of coins and notes. She had enough if she did not buy anything extra for 2 weeks, and if nothing broke, and if Olisa did not need anything unexpected. That was many ifs. She sat down slowly on the chair and smoothed her skirt. Olisa looked up. "Who was that, Mama?" "Our neighbor. She came to greet us," Udoka said, then added, "and to remind us that the landlord will collect the rent soon." He nodded, as if this were simply one more part of the world, like rain or a bus. "Will we pay?" "We will pay," she answered, and she made sure her voice was certain. He went back to his homework. She watched him and felt the familiar ache that was not pain and not joy, but something that lived in the space between them, something heavy and sweet. She stood and reached for her bag. "Let me check your books," she said gently when he finished. He brought them to her and she flipped through the pages, asking him to explain a math problem, to read a paragraph aloud, to spell a word. He did well. She tried not to show how proud she was. Sometimes pride made her eyes water, and she did not want him to think she was sad. Very good, she said. You learn fast. He lifted his chin a little. I will not forget to carry numbers again, she laughed. See that you do not. When he had brushed his teeth and climbed into bed, she tucked the thin sheet around his shoulders. He looked up at her with an earnest question. Mama, are you happy? She sat beside him. The question was a small stone dropped in a deep well. She thought of the long hours, of the smell of detergent in her lungs, of the ache that lived in her back and thighs. She thought of the tin box in her bag and the careful paths she walked with coins spread like stepping stones over deep water. She thought of his smile at the table, the way his eyes grew bright when she told him he would one day sit in a plane. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. I am happy when I look at you, she said. I am happy when you learn. I am happy when I can give you food and see you sleep. He smiled, satisfied, and turned to face the wall. Good night, Mama. Good night, my son, she whispered. She watched his breathing slow, watched the small rise and fall of his chest, and let the silence gather in the room. The night outside had softened. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn called once and then was gone. When she was sure he was asleep, she pulled her bag from under the bed and opened it quietly. She took out the tin box and placed it on the table. The lock clicked open with a familiar sound. She added the brown envelope from the dentist's office, counted again, and moved a small stack from the unexpected corner to the rent corner. She ran her fingers through the coins, not because she needed to count them again, but because she needed to touch the work of her days, to feel the shape of her choices. She turned off the lamp to save the kerosene and sat in the quiet dark. Through the open window, the night's air drifted in, warm but kind. She pressed her palms together and prayed in a low whisper. Thank you for today. Give me strength for tomorrow. Keep him safe. Keep his mind bright. Let me be enough. Let this little be stretched by your hand. When she lay down beside him, her body felt as if it were made of wood. Every joint had a voice, and all of them were tired. Still, a small smile rested on her lips. She had bought the tomatoes. She had cooked the rice and stretched it so that there was a little left for tomorrow's breakfast. She had paid attention to his schoolwork. She had adjusted the tin's small stacks to shape the week ahead. It was not victory as most people counted it, but it was enough for her heart to sleep. The next morning, she woke before the first light again, as she always did. She untied her scarf and retied it, a small ritual that felt like fastening courage. She placed a small portion of the leftover rice in a container for Olisa's morning meal. She put a few coins in the pocket of his shorts for water after school. She checked the window to make sure his uniform had dried in the night. She pressed the fabric with her palms when the iron on the shared table in the courtyard was already claimed. Her hands could smooth as well as any iron if she pressed long enough. When he opened his eyes, she turned to him with the smile she saved for mornings. It was a soft smile that chased away the hard edges of sleep. Good morning, my sunshine, she said. Good morning, Mama, he replied, lifting his arms for a hug. She held him close and breathed in the scent of soap and boy. He ate and dressed, and she tied his belt straight the way he liked it. As he lifted his bag, she placed the container in it and squeezed his shoulder. Read with your heart, she said. I will, he promised. He left with a small wave, and the door clicked behind him. The room felt bigger without him in it, and also emptier. She picked up the tin, put it back into her bag, and stood. Another day waited, patient and demanding. She took a deep breath and stepped out to meet it. At the school office later that week, she stood in a line of parents, each with an envelope, each with the same cautious hope in their eyes. When it was her turn, she stepped forward. The woman behind the desk, busy but polite, looked up. Good morning. Name of the student? Olisa, Udoka said, her voice even. She pronounced his name with a softness that carried pride and prayer. The woman checked a register and nodded. Outstanding balance is here. Are you paying part or full? Udoka opened her envelope and removed the notes carefully. She had counted them at home, counted them on the bus, counted them while she waited. She pushed them forward and said, "Full." The woman's brows lifted slightly with pleasant surprise. "Very good." She counted again and wrote a receipt, then stamped it. "All set. Next payment due next term." She handed the receipt to Udoka. "Thank you," Udoka said quietly. She folded the receipt and placed it in her bag with a reverence that felt like saving a small flag after a battle. Outside, the sun was bright. The air smelled of dust and possibility. Children laughed in the distance, the sound rising and falling like a song. She stood on the steps for a moment, blinking against the light. Something eased in her chest. The rent would press hard in a few days, but right now one weight had moved from her shoulders. She allowed herself a long breath. On the way home, she passed a bookstore with a display of bright covers. She stopped and stared at them for a moment. A book in the middle showed a boy sitting under a tree, reading. She glanced at the price and did the math. Not today, but she stood a little longer, as if looking were a kind of purchase, and then she walked on. That evening, when Olisa came through the door, she held the receipt behind her back. "Mama?" he said, curious. She brought the paper forward and placed it on the table. "Your school fees are paid for this term." He stared at the paper, then at her. His smile grew so quickly it seemed to surprise his own face. "Thank you, Mama. Study well," she said. "That is how you can thank me." "I will," he promised. Then he sprang forward and wrapped his arms around her waist. She gathered him to her and rested her chin on his head, closing her eyes for a moment. She did not tell him she had given up buying new slippers. She did not tell him she would work an extra hour at the hospital this week. She did not tell him she had eaten half portions 3 nights in a row. He did not need to carry those stories. "Can we read together after dinner?" he asked, looking up at her. "Yes," she said, and her answer was soft but strong. "Bring your book after we eat." She cooked and they ate, and after the plates were clean, she sat with him on the bed while he read a story aloud. He stumbled over a difficult word and looked at her. "Sound it slowly," she guided. He tried again. "Persistent." "Persistent," she finished. "It means not giving up." He smiled, the meaning sinking into him like warm light. "Persistent," he repeated, as if the word might help him later when the road felt long. They read until his eyes drooped, and then she tucked him in. She stayed longer than usual, listening to the night. When she finally lay down, she did so with a kind of peace that did not erase the tiredness, but laid a gentle hand over it. In the days that followed, the pattern held. Every coin Udoka earned was set aside with care. If she needed soap, she broke a coin's worth from the bar and swapped with the neighbor to save the cost of a new one. If the pot needed more oil, she measured out drops and told herself that patience added flavor. If a friend offered a ripe mango, she accepted it with thanks and cut it into small pieces at home so that the sweetness lasted longer. Each evening, when the door opened and Olisa stepped in, she greeted him with brightness. She learned to fold the edges of her fatigue under her smile. She discovered that joy could sit beside hunger without complaint if love kept the seat warm. Her pain remained tucked away in quiet corners. The sting of soap in cracked hands, the ache of her back in the dark hours, the way her knees felt heavy on staircases. She kept these things in secret rooms inside her, rooms that needed no lights. Her love, however, could not be hidden, even though she did not speak of it much. It shone in the way she stirred the pot a little longer for flavor. It lived in the extra spoonful she found for his plate, and the stories she made up when the power went out, and they sat in the hush of candlelight. It glowed in the way she said his name, like a small song, in the way she set his shoes by the door, cleaned and ready, as if the future might judge her by the shine she kept on his morning. And every night, when the city settled and the window drew a square of shy moonlight on the floor, Udoka opened her tin box and counted again, not only the coins, not only the notes, but the days she had made possible. She counted the mistakes she had managed to avoid and the small victories she had gathered, like tiny shells at the beach of a long journey. Then she closed the lid, turned down the lamp, and whispered into the quiet room a prayer that had learned her voice by heart. Let me be strong enough. Let him be free enough. Let tomorrow bring us a little more than today. Morning came with a thin silver light across the small room, and the breeze at the window brought the scent of wet earth. Udoka rose quietly so she would not wake Olisa and folded the blanket at the foot of his bed. He had grown taller. The blanket was a little short now, and his feet sometimes pressed against the cool air of night. She tucked it under carefully and went to the table where the school uniform lay, washed and pressed. She ran her palm over the shirt, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle. Her hands were rough, and in the quiet moment, she noticed the tiny cracks across her fingers. She pulled them back and let the shirt be. When Olisa stirred, she carried a small dish of pap to the table and stirred it until it looked smooth. Good morning, my sunshine, she said softly. Good morning, Mama, he answered, his voice deeper than it had been last year. He rubbed his eyes and sat up. Eat while it is warm, she said. You have a long day. He nodded, reached for the spoon, and took a mouthful without looking up. He was not unkind, only distracted. His bag leaned against the chair. The strap had a new tear where the weight of books pulled it day after day. Udoka made a note in her mind to fix it with strong thread at night. You have the debate today, yes? She asked. Yes, he said, brightening. I am the lead speaker. The topic is about whether technology helps education. I think it does. You think well, she replied, and the pride in her voice was warm as a small fire. Speak slowly. Let your words breathe. He smiled a little. Our teacher said the same thing. She touched his shoulder gently. Then it must be good advice. He finished eating, dressed, and stood tall for her to inspect. Turn around, she said. He obeyed, and she checked the collar, the buttons, the hem. He looked handsome and serious, as if he could already see the future from the doorway. Go well, she said, handing him a small container of food. Do not forget to drink water. He gave a quick nod and then hesitated, glancing at her scarf and the apron folded on the chair. Mama, will you be around the school today? She lowered her eyes to the apron. I do not have a job near your school today, she said honestly. I will be at the office building and then the hospital. He relaxed just a little. Okay, I just wanted to know. She smiled to hide the small pinch behind her ribs. You wanted me to know where to find you if I wanted to cheer you on, she said lightly. He gave a short laugh, not meeting her eyes. Yes, something like that. When he left, the room felt larger and emptier. Udoka lifted the apron, tied it around her waist, and carried her bucket and gloves to the door. She paused before stepping out and looked at the uniform shirt again. The crease she had pressed with careful hands, the white collar that made him look so ready for the world. She closed the door behind her and moved into the day. At the office building, she started on the lobby floor, the tiles shining back her reflection in a watery way. People came in with coffee cups and busy voices, their shoes leaving small paths of dust that she followed and erased. She wiped fingerprints from the glass doors. She changed a trash bag with a quiet efficiency that came from years of practice. A man in a suit almost bumped her bucket and made a face. He whispered something to a colleague and they both laughed. Udoka lowered her eyes and moved on. She had learned that not all laughter needed to be understood. Later, at a house in Ikoyi, she scrubbed a kitchen floor until the water in the bucket turned a tired gray. The woman of the house took a call and spoke loudly about a charity event while pointing at a streak on the countertop. "Please, clean that again," the woman said, not unkindly, only as if pointing out a shadow. Udoka cleaned it again. When she reached home to change before her night shift, Olisa's debate medal lay on the table, a small circle of bronze on a bright ribbon. A note in his careful handwriting said, "Mama, I won. I knew I would hear your voice telling me to let my words breathe." The words made her sit down for a moment and her eyes filled. She swallowed the tears and smiled, then pinned the ribbon to the wall with a small nail, placing it above the family photo like a flag of hope. Olisa returned later, breathless with success, and told her every detail. The moment the judges nodded, the quick replies he made, the cheer from his classmates. "Even the teacher said I spoke like a future lawyer," he said, standing taller. "And what did you say?" Udoka asked. "I said, 'Thank you, Ma,'" she clapped quietly. "Well said." Over the next weeks, success wrapped itself around Olisa like a new jacket. He was called to read at assembly. He was chosen to represent his class in a quiz competition. He began to sit with a group of older boys, some with new shoes and phones that glowed in their hands after school. He came home with stories about apps and coding and plans for university. Udoka listened and loved each new detail, but she noticed how his eyes shifted when she spoke about work. Once, while mending his bag with thread pulled through a needle, she said, "Tomorrow I will clean the school hall in the afternoon before I go to the hospital. They are short-staffed. Perhaps I will see you from a distance." Olisa's face tightened. He scratched at a spot on the table and said, "You do not need to come near the school, Mama. It is fine." She looked at him long enough to see the invisible wall appear, a quiet brick set between them. She pushed the needle through the strap again and made the stitch small and neat. "It is only a hole," she said gently. "No one will notice me." He did not look up. "I would rather you did not." For a second, the thread in her hand felt too thin to hold. She tied a knot, cut it with her teeth, and said softly, "Okay." The next day, the school hall smelled of dust and chalk. Udoka worked quickly, moving the mop in straight lines like a calm heartbeat. A group of students passed the open door. Their voices spilled into the hall like light through a crack. "Have you heard? Olisa won again. He is always winning. He is like the teacher's favorite. My mother says he is going to make it big." Another voice added, "Do you know his mother? Someone told me she is a cleaner. She cleans at the hospital near my aunt's shop." A soft laugh followed. "Are you serious? People like that work hard," someone else said more kindly. "It is nothing to laugh at." The voices faded. Udoka stood still for a moment, listening to the quiet she had stirred with her own movement. She moved the mop again and finished the job. She left before the next bell rang. That evening, Olisa's friends walked with him down the road. They were bright and loud, tossing words in the air the way boys toss a ball. Udoka waited by the corner with a small bag for the market, ready to buy pepper before going home. She watched them come closer and felt her heart lift, happy to see him smiling, alive in his growing world. She wanted to wave. She did not. She decided to let him introduce her if he wished. "Mama!" Olisa had called her in the distance many times with joy that leaped like a flame. But as he neared the corner now, he saw the apron folded in her bag, saw the gloves peeking out, saw the wear in her slippers. He looked uncertain. His friends were talking about a new place to buy shawarma, about a teacher's joke. One of them glanced at Udoka, then at him. "Who is that woman?" the friend asked casually. Olisa's breath caught. His answer came too quickly. I do not know, he said. The sentence landed like a stone. The world narrowed to the space between them. Udoka felt the words pass over her face, and though they were not a blow, they were not soft. She kept her gaze on the ground and shifted her weight. The boys passed. One of them said, "She looks familiar." Another shrugged, unmoved, and they went on, the sound of their shoes eating up the road. When they turned the corner, Udoka lifted her head. For a heartbeat, she looked where her son had gone and followed the sound of his laughter that echoed from the next street, lower now, like something carried away by the wind. She stood for a long minute. Then she walked to the market and bought pepper and a small bundle of greens. She greeted the vendor, paid, and returned home with steps that looked normal and felt heavy. That night, while washing dishes, she replayed the scene quietly. She was careful not to let the plates clatter because Olisa was at the table pretending to read but mostly staring at the page. She dried her hands and sat across from him. "How was your day?" she asked. "Fine," he said without looking up. "Did you finish the assignment on ecosystems?" He nodded. "Yes." She waited for the right moment to pass, then said gently, "I saw you with your friends this afternoon." His shoulders tensed. His pencil tapped once, twice. "You did?" "I stood by the corner. I did not wish to disturb your time with them." He swallowed. "Okay." She did not accuse him. She did not ask why he had said what he said. She looked at his hands, which would not be calloused if she could help it. And she thought of the heat of the hospital corridors and the way antiseptic bit the inside of her nose. She thought of the tin box and the neat stacks that had carried his fees safely across months. She looked at her own fingers and remembered the words, "I do not know." She took a breath and said simply, "Olisa, I am your mother. I am not ashamed of my work. I know you are growing and your world is changing. Sometimes when people do not understand, it is easy to feel shy, but nothing you achieve will be less because of where you started. Nothing I do for you is small." His eyes flicked up and away again. "I know," he said quickly, but it sounded like a door being closed. She nodded as if he had said something large. "Good," she replied softly and stood to clear the table. The next week, a parent-teacher meeting was announced. Udoka came early and sat in the second row, her skirt neat, her scarf tied carefully. The classroom smelled of chalk and paper. Parents murmured. The teacher stood at the front, reading achievements from the term. When she reached Olisa's name, the teacher's smile widened. "We are very proud of him," the teacher said. "He leads with humility and hard work." The parents clapped. Udoka's heart expanded and filled the small room. She clapped without making a sound. When the meeting ended, parents moved forward to speak with the teacher. Udoka waited until the cluster thinned. Then she stepped up. "Good afternoon, Ma," she said. "Good afternoon," the teacher replied warmly. "You must be Olisa's mother." "Yes," Udoka answered, and for a second she stood taller because of the word. "Thank you for guiding him." "He is a joy to teach," the teacher said. "He has a special way with words. We are planning a regional competition next term. He would do wonderfully." Udoka nodded, folding her hands to keep them still. "Please, let me know what is needed." "We will send a list home," the teacher said. As Udoka turned to go, she saw Olisa by the door. He had not entered the classroom. He hovered outside, pretending to look at a notice. When he realized she had seen him, he stepped back and stared down the hallway. He waited until she passed, then walked slowly in the other direction. At home that night, Udoka poured rice into the pot and listened to it tick like tiny rain against metal. She did not speak about the meeting. She told him dinner would be ready soon. He said he would finish his reading. The quiet between them grew into a soft fabric they both wore. In the days that followed, small incidents added their threads. Once, Udoka brought him a new pen she had been given by a receptionist who had too many. "Look," she said. "It writes smoothly." He took it with a quick "thank you," but hid it in his bag when a friend walked up the path, as if new pens did not matter or did not belong where his friends might see. Another time, she walked near the school gate on market day and saw him outside with classmates. She raised a hand, then lowered it when she saw him touch his forehead as if he suddenly remembered something more urgent to look at. She stood by a fruit stall for a while, picked up an orange, put it down, picked up another, and left without buying, the way a person leaves a thought half finished. The neighbors noticed her quiet and tried to be kind in the ways they knew how. "Boys go through a phase," one woman said, folding clothes on a low stool. "They come back around." Another said, "The world teaches them to be proud. Life will teach them to be grateful." Udoka smiled and thanked them and returned to her work. At night, in the hospital corridor, she pushed the mop and watched the way the overhead lights turned the floor into a bright path that always needed attention. A nurse passed and said, "You look tired." Udoka replied, "I am fine," and kept moving. One evening, after a long shift, she reached home and found Olisa awake with a book. His face was pinched and there was a small tear in the page he must have turned too hard. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her bag. He shook his head. "Nothing." She walked closer. "Tell me." He pressed his lips together. Then it came out all at once, rushed and hot. "Someone said in class that I act important, but I am not important because my mother is a cleaner. They said it like dirt." They laughed. The room held its breath. Udoka sat down beside him and placed a hand on the table. "What did you say?" He looked away. "I said nothing." Silence moved between them like a slow river. Udoka's mind flickered over answers. Part of her wanted to say, "Speak up, defend me, defend yourself." Another part wanted to say, "It does not matter what they think." But both truths felt too sharp to put into a wound still open. She took a different road. "Sometimes people use laughter to hide their fear," she said quietly. "Sometimes they do not understand what work means. Work is not shame. Work is the reason lights turn on and floors are clean and books are sorted and food reaches tables. The hands that build are never dirty in the way the world suggests." He swallowed. "But why should I have to explain? Why should they know at all?" His voice cracked. "They will not understand, and I do not want them to see you that way." She looked at him with steady eyes. "What way is that?" He closed his eyes and whispered, tired, wearing the apron, holding the bucket. Her breath caught, but her voice remained gentle. "That apron feeds you and pays for your books. The bucket carried water that washed your uniform. These hands," she lifted them, the cracked knuckles, the lines like small roads. "These hands have not failed you." He opened his eyes and stared at her hands. "I know," he said, and the words were true, but crowded by all the other words he could not yet say. She reached across the small space and brushed his hair from his forehead. "You are growing, Olisa. Growing is confusing. Pride will push you away from what made you, and love will pull you back. The pulling can hurt. It is still love." He blinked hard. "I am sorry about today at the corner," he said suddenly, as if the sentence had waited for a chance since the afternoon he had said, "I do not know." "I am sorry for other days too. I do not always know what to do." "Thank you," she said, and meant it. She did not add more. Forgiveness need not be loud to be real. They sat together in the soft circle of lamplight. The sound of crickets rose from the courtyard. Somewhere a radio played a song too faint to name. She closed the book he was not reading and placed it gently to the side. "Come," she said. "Eat a little, then sleep. Tomorrow waits." He ate and then slept, and she watched him for a time. She went to her bag, took out the tin box, and counted slowly, like a prayer. the notes and coins, ready to become school fees and meals and transport and light. When she was done, she closed the lid and held it for a long moment. She pressed her palms together and prayed in the quiet, not for the walls to vanish, but for the bridge to hold. In the days that followed, the shadow of shame did not vanish. It settled into corners, as shadows do, and returned when certain voices rose, when certain eyes turned. Olisa sometimes pulled away without thinking. He sometimes spoke too sharply when she asked simple questions. At other times, he leaned closer, overwhelmed by his own pull in the opposite direction, and said, "Mama, help me with this line," or "Mama, listen to what the teacher said about hard work." And he would read a sentence aloud that sounded like something she had taught him long before any classroom. Udoka accepted the push and pull and did not keep a ledger of wrongs. When he turned away in public, she pretended to be absorbed by a fruit stand or a bus schedule. When he forgot to say thank you for a small gift, she waited, and sometimes the thanks came later, washed and honest. Each denial pierced her, yes, but she learned to loosen her breath around the wound so that it would not close into bitterness. Bitterness was a luxury of those who could afford to stop. She could not stop. Love kept her hands moving. At the end of the month, she walked to the school office again. She handed over a payment and took a receipt. As she turned, she met the eyes of a boy from Olisa's class. He looked at her, then at the mop leaning against the wall outside the office door, left by a janitor who had stepped out. His mouth twitched in a way that made her think he might say something small and cutting. Instead, he lowered his eyes and stepped aside for her to pass. Outside, Udoka stood in the sunlight and let it warm her shoulders. She watched a flock of birds lift from a tree all at once, like ideas suddenly free. She thought of Olisa standing on a stage, words at his lips, the light on his face. He would one day see the full shape of the road behind him. For now, it was enough to keep it clear. That evening, while stirring a pot of beans, she heard the door open gently. Olisa entered with a hesitant smile, as if something soft had returned to him during the walk home. "Mama," he said, "the regional competition list came today. I am on it." Her smile rose like dawn. "I knew you would be." He nodded. "They said we might need to travel to another school. There will be a fee for materials." She stirred once more and lowered the heat. "We will make it happen," she said. He lifted his eyes to her. "Mama, thank you." She nodded and let the silence hold their words safely. The beans simmered. The room filled with a warm smell. Outside, the first stars began to appear. He took a breath, then asked, "Will you come to the competition?" She looked at him to be sure of what he meant. He met her eyes without looking away. "Yes," she said, "if you want me to." "I do," he replied, quiet but firm. "Then I will come," she said, and something inside her unclenched, like a hand finally opening. He moved to set the table. "Can I help with anything else?" "You can taste the beans and tell me if it needs more salt," she said. He smiled for real, and some invisible weight shifted. He took the spoon, tasted, and laughed. "It is perfect," he said, and then corrected himself, careful with his words, as she had taught him. "It is almost perfect, maybe a little salt." She shook her head, smiling, and added a pinch. "Almost perfect is still very good," she said. "We will keep working." As they ate, he told her about a new passage he had to memorize, and how the teacher wanted them to practice holding their chin up when they spoke. She listened, and her nods were steady as a rhythm. When he recited a line for her, she closed her eyes to hear it better. "Again," she said softly, and he recited again, slower this time, letting the words breathe, just as she had told him that first day. When the plates were clean and the lamp turned low, Udoka lay awake in the quiet, feeling the lingering ache of the day and something like hope sitting beside it. Shame still hovered at the edges, a shadow waiting for the wrong light. But love had learned how to stand, even in dim rooms. It had learned how to carry its own small flame. In the darkness, she reached for the tin box and rested her hand on its cool lid without opening it. Tomorrow, she whispered, we will keep going. And the night, kind for once, made no argument at all. The short Harmattan morning began with a sharp ache in Udoka's lower back. It woke her like a polite knock that turned into a fist. She lay still, eyes open, listening to the small sounds of the room, the soft rustle of the curtain, Olisa's steady breathing, the distant clatter of a vendor setting up a tray. The ache did not pass. It grew, slow and stubborn, like a knot tied in the dark. She moved carefully so she would not wake her son. The old mattress groaned. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palm into her back. Pain fed into the top of her hip and down her leg. She closed her eyes and counted to 5. Counting helped. It made pain feel like a person who could be reasoned with. Good morning, Lord, she whispered. Please help me stand. She stood. The room tilted a little, then settled. She tucked the blanket tighter around Olisa, who had grown taller again. His feet had begun to claim more space on the bed. She smiled and adjusted the sheet near his shoulder. He opened his eyes for a moment, saw her face, and let sleep pull him back under. At the table, she poured water from a plastic bottle into a small pot and lit the stove. The flame trembled, then steadied. She stirred pap slowly, listening to the spoon scratch the bottom of the pot. Her hands moved by memory. She added a pinch of sugar, took down the 2 chipped cups, and tasted a little to be sure it was not too hot. Time to wake, she said softly, touching Olisa's shoulder. Eat before it cools. He rolled over and sat up, hair tousled, eyes bright. Good morning, Mama. Good morning, she answered. She did not mention the pain. She never started the day with complaint. There is news on the school board today, yes? He nodded. The list for the regional debate. We also have a test in chemistry. You will do well, she said. Remember to rest your eyes between pages, he smiled. You always say that, because it is true. They ate together. He told her about a new club a classmate had joined. He said the club charged dues. He said the teacher promised that members would visit a university lab one day. He said it with care, as if testing how the words would land in the space between them. How much are the dues? She asked. He named an amount that was not large to the world, but was not small to them. She did the math in her head without moving her lips. We will find a way, she said. Are you sure? He asked. Yes, she said. If you join, you must be present in the meetings. Do not sign your name and disappear. I will not, he promised. Then he looked at her face more closely. Are you okay, Mama? You look tired. She lifted her hand as if brushing a cobweb from the air. I am fine. Go on now. You will be late. When he left, she washed the cups, dried them, and put them back on the shelf. She stood at the doorway and stretched her back gently. The stretch helped a little. She tied her scarf and gathered her tools. Her apron waited on the chair like armor. Outside, the sky was pale and the air dry. The ground held a fine dust. It would rise to the ankles of people as the city moved faster. She walked to the bus stop, step by step, ignoring the tug of pain. It moved with her like a slow shadow. At the tall office in Victoria Island, the guard nodded. Good morning, Madam Udoka. Good morning, she said, and meant it. The marble floor reflected the early light. She filled her bucket. The water looked like a calm sky. She added a measure of soap and watched the clear turn cloudy. It felt like a lesson she had learned many times. Clean water becomes useful when mixed with work. She mopped left, right, left, following the pattern she had taught her muscles. The mop's wooden handle pressed against her palm. After the lobby, she went to the elevators. She polished the stainless steel panels with a soft cloth. She moved the cloth in circles, small and patient, the way she rubbed aches from her knees at night. Halfway through the second floor, a sharp pain shot through her lower back and stole her breath. She stopped and held the mop as if it were a cane. Sweat gathered at her hairline, even though the morning was cool. She waited, counting again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then 6 for courage. She straightened. The pain eased to a dull throb. She finished the floor, then the next. She did not do less because of the pain. She did not know how. At 10, she stepped outside to breathe. A bench offered a short rest. She sat, hands folded over the apron. A woman from the office passed with a paper cup of coffee. She paused. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Udoka said, and gave a small smile. "Only a little tired?" "You work hard," the woman said softly. "Do you have someone at home to help you?" "I have my son," Udoka answered, and the pride in those words warmed her more than the sun did. "He studies." "That is good," the woman said. "Be careful with your back." "I will," Udoka promised, though careful was a luxury her schedule rarely allowed. By noon, the city had turned noisy and bright. She ate 2 biscuits with water and let them stand for a meal. She thought of the club dues. She thought of the hospital shift. She thought of the landlord's knock that would come in a week. She arranged these thoughts in neat rows in her mind, as if they were plates that needed stacking. In Surulere, she cleaned a set of small offices above a printing shop. The rooms were filled with paper smell and the dry hum of old fans. She wiped dust from the windowsills and removed a coffee stain from a desk with a mixture of vinegar and patience. A young man with ink on his fingers said, "Thank you, Auntie. The room looks new." "You are welcome," she replied, and the words gave her a little strength. By late afternoon, clouds gathered. The first raindrops were fat and far apart. She looked at the sky and at the long road home. She had promised herself a short rest before the hospital. She decided to try to keep the promise. The rain came hard 10 minutes later, a gray sheet across the road. She ran under a shop awning with 2 schoolgirls and a man who sold phone cases. Water bounced from the ground and soaked her skirt to the knees. The girls giggled and tried to keep their notebooks dry. The man said, "This rain will not stop soon. It will stop when it stops." Udoka said simply. She watched the water gather and run along the gutter like silver snakes. The rain had a cold smell that made her think of laundry not yet dry, of floors that would need mopping again. When the rain softened to a steady drizzle, she stepped out. The road was full of puddles that held small pieces of the sky. She walked around them when she could, and through them when she must. The pain in her back grew sharp again and spread to her right hip. She pressed her palm there as if she could hold the pain in place and keep it from wandering into the rest of her. At home, she hung her wet scarf by the window and changed into a dry one. Olisa was not back yet. A note lay on the table. "Labs after school. Do not wait for me." His handwriting was quick and tall, like his new walk. She smiled at the note. She boiled water for tea, added a spoon of milk powder, and held the cup against her chest before drinking. The warmth moved into her like a kind word. A soft knock came at the door. It was the neighbor who sold fabric in the market. She held a small jar. "I brought shea butter," the neighbor said. "Rub it on your back. It helps." Udoka laughed gently. "Do I look like someone whose back needs help?" The neighbor raised an eyebrow. "You look like someone who does not say when she needs it." "Thank you," Udoka said, accepting the jar. "How much?" "Leave it," the neighbor replied. "You can pay later or pay with a smile. That is also a kind of money." Udoka's eyes warmed. "Then I owe you 2 smiles." "Give me 3, the neighbor teased, then lowered her voice. You must rest sometimes. I will try, Udoka said. Try harder, the neighbor replied, and left with a wink. Udoka rubbed the shea butter into her back. The skin drank it in. The ache softened a little, like a stubborn child quieted by a song. She set the jar on the table and looked at the clock. The hospital shift waited. She tied her second-best scarf and put on sturdier shoes. She packed a piece of bread wrapped in paper for the midnight hour. At the hospital, the air was sharp with antiseptic. The corridors shone. The supervisor, a kind man with tired eyes, saw her and frowned. "You are pale," he said. "I am fine," she answered. "You always say that," he said. "If you need to shorten today's shift, tell me." She shook her head. "I will finish." He studied her. "All right, but if the pain is serious, you go home. We need strong workers, not fallen ones." "I understand," she said. She filled her bucket and began. The mop slid over tiles that reflected the ceiling lights as a long bright river. Nurses pushed trolleys. Doctors moved with quick steps. A child cried softly in a room and then went quiet. The hospital was a map of pain and care, and Udoka walked its roads every night. Around midnight, while wiping a waiting room chair, she felt a wave of heat break over her skin. It was sudden and fierce. She leaned on the chair back and closed her eyes. The room tilted. She opened her eyes and found a seat, lowering herself slowly. She took a sip of water. Her hands trembled. Sweat rolled down her temple. A nurse passing by stopped. "Are you okay?" "Just a little dizzy," Udoka said. "Have you eaten?" "Yes," Udoka lied, then corrected herself. "A little." "Do you have malaria?" the nurse asked. "Maybe," she admitted. The nurse looked at her for a moment, then nodded toward the corridor. "Come, we will check your temperature." "I am working," Udoka protested softly. "You will work better if you can stand," the nurse said. In a small room, the nurse pressed a thermometer to her forehead, then frowned. "You have a fever." "I can still work," Udoka said quietly. The nurse sighed. "You can, but you should not. Rest here for an hour. I will tell the supervisor." Udoka wanted to argue. She knew how 1 hour could ripple through the rest of the day, but the chair under her felt like a boat at sea, and the water felt rough. She nodded. "Only an hour," she said. "Only an hour," the nurse agreed. Udoka closed her eyes. She did not sleep, but the fever lifted a little, enough to let the world grow still again. She thought of Olisa, perhaps awake in bed, studying a page with long sentences, and she smiled, a tired small thing that still had light in it. After the hour, she stood and thanked the nurse. She finished the shift quietly, moving slower but still moving. When she turned in her bucket, the supervisor looked as if he would scold her for staying. Instead, he said, "Go home, cover yourself well, drink water. If you do not come tomorrow, I will not mark you absent." "Thank you," she said, grateful for mercy shaped like a sentence. Outside, the early morning sky wore a faint pink. The city had not fully woken. She walked home with her scarf pulled high on her neck and her arms folded to hold in the warmth. Her joints ached in a deep, old way, as if the pain had grown up with her work. At the door, she paused to breathe, then stepped in. Olisa had fallen asleep at the table again, head on his books. The lamp still glowed weakly, a pool of gold around him. She stood over him and saw the pen cap pressed into his cheek, leaving a tiny mark. She wanted to move him to the bed, but her back told her to leave the lifting for another day. She turned off the lamp and laid a cloth over his shoulders. "Ambition is a strong wind," she whispered into the quiet room. "Let it blow, but let it not carry you away." She lay down and pulled the blanket to her chin. Sleep came in short pieces. When the first birds called the morning, she got up and made tea. She crushed a ginger knob into the water and let the steam rise. Olisa woke to the smell and blinked at the light. "Mama," he said, "you are awake early." "I am always awake early," she said, and smiled. He stretched and winced a little at the stiff neck. "I should not have slept on the table." You are growing, she said. Your neck is telling you to be kinder. He laughed. Then his face turned serious. Mama, the club dues. I can delay it if it is too much. She shook her head. Pay it. Attend the meetings. Learn what you can. He nodded, relief softening his features. I will make it worth it. You already do, she said, and meant it. Days folded into weeks. The fever returned and left like a visitor without a fixed address. Her back ached most in the afternoon, less in the night. She learned to rest her left foot when she waited for the bus, then switched to the right when the left began to complain. She worked in rain and in sudden heat. She wrapped plastic around her hair when the sky opened without warning. She saved. She counted. She prayed in short lines between tasks. Help me, she would say. Eyes lift for a second to a ceiling or a slice of sky. Keep him safe, she would add, touching the edge of Olisa's notebook when he was not looking. Let me make it to the end of today, she would finish. And she always did, even on the days that felt like long roads with no shade. Olisa grew busier. He left early, returned late, and often spoke while reading notes, as if he had to do both things to finish everything before the day was done. When she told him to rest, he laughed and said, after the competition. After the competition, there will be another thing, she replied. He grinned. Then after that other thing. Sometimes he forgot to ask about her day. Sometimes she forgot to answer the question even when he asked. It was not a failure of love, only a symptom of motion. Two lives can run fast next to each other and still miss a glance. She forgave him for his speed. She forgave herself for her silence. On a Saturday, when the sun was gentle, she visited the small clinic near the market. The doctor looked serious and kind. You need rest, he said after pressing her belly and listening to her chest. Your blood pressure is high. Your back muscles are strained. No heavy lifting for a while. No late nights. She smiled a little. I understand, she said, though both of them knew that she could not obey every instruction. At least reduce the hours, he urged. Take these tablets. Eat before night work. If the pain worsens, come back. I will try, she replied. Try harder, he said, echoes of her neighbor's words, and handed her the prescription. She stood outside the clinic and looked at the list. The cost was manageable if she delayed buying kerosene for a week, and if she stretched the rice, and if nothing else broke. She bought the medicine and decided to stretch the rice. That evening, she cooked with slow hands. Olisa arrived full of words about a practice session and a new idea he had tried in his speech. He barely tasted the food before leaving for a study group. I will be back late, he said at the door. Do not wait up. Be careful, she said. Do not walk alone. I will be with them, he said, waving at his friends waiting in the courtyard. She watched him go. He walked quickly, shoulders forward, eyes on the corner where the road turned. She stood for a moment after the gate closed, letting the quiet fill her throat. When he returned much later, she was not asleep. She sat with her feet in a bowl of warm water and salt, letting the heat unlace the tightness from her ankles. He looked surprised to see her awake. Mama, you should sleep earlier, he said. I was thinking about a story, she replied. What story? The story of a road, she said. He dropped his bag and sat, interested despite himself. Tell me. She looked at her feet in the cloudy water, then at his eager face. A road is built by many hands, she began. Some hands plan, some measure, some lift stones, some carry water. Most people only see the car that glides over the finished road, never the backs that bend to make it level. He listened, eyes dark and wide. But the road knows, she continued softly. The road remembers every hand. It remembers every stone set in pain. It holds the footsteps of those who built it and the footsteps of those who will travel it later. He swallowed and said very quietly, Mama, I understand. I know you will, she said. Maybe not now, but you will. He moved closer and put a hand on her shoulder. Does your back hurt? Yes, she admitted. Sometimes. Take my bed tonight, he said quickly. I will sleep on the mat, she smiled. No, I sleep better near the window. He did not argue. He rose and fetched a towel, dried her feet, and lifted the bowl. He moved with a seriousness that made him look older. Thank you, she said. You are welcome, he replied, and the simple exchange felt like a small bridge built between two busy shores. As days tipped into weeks, Udoka kept working, less some nights, less when the fever spoke too loudly, but still more than anyone else would have advised. She saved for the club dues, the materials fee, the transport to the regional competition. She mended her shoes with strong thread. She learned to warm her back with a cloth pressed with hot water. She let herself sit for 10 minutes in the afternoon and called it rest. She prayed, always. Her prayers were short and plain. Give me strength. Protect him. Let this pain mean something. Olisa, pulled forward by ambition, sometimes forgot to look back. Not from cruelty, no, he still loved gently, but because the future called his name in a loud voice and he was learning to answer. On the hardest days, the distance between them felt like the length of the city. On the softer days, it was only the width of the table. Her comfort was not in the relief of her body. Her comfort was the picture she carried in her mind and placed before her like a lamp. A young man walking a road she had built, not with machines, but with mornings and nights, with bowls of pap and clean shirts, with sore hands and whispered prayers. She believed that each step he took would press gratitude back into the stones one day. She believed that meaning could be stronger than pain if given time. On a night heavy with clouds, she stood in the hospital corridor and leaned her shoulder against the wall for a moment. The tiles shone. The clock moved. Her breath came slow. She whispered to the quiet hall, I am still here. And that for now was enough.